Who here has ever been to a reInvent conference? Okay, so a bit of a mix. If you haven't, you really absolutely should go. It's an amazing, energizing experience. So for those who have been there, tell me a little bit, what are you feeling? Imagine you're back at the conference now, listening to Andy Jassy of Werner Vogel's keynote, hearing a flurry of amazing announcements. What are you feeling at that moment? Do you remember? Holler it out if you have any ideas. Usually comes up with a lot of energy, excitement. People are really excited about all the new opportunities that they can use with all the services they're seeing with this flurry of announcements.
Next up, huh? Are we next up?
Now if you imagine yourself on the way home, and you're on the plane flight reflecting back on the conference.
We might have to wait.
For those people here, if you think back, what were you feeling then?
Because I'm not sure how many.
A lot of times it's a little bit of panic maybe. You're overwhelmed, worried a little bit, did you miss something? Or as a flood of information continues, will you miss something else, or you'll be able to keep up in the weeks and months to follow?
So our next speakers are here?
Certainly that's what I feel every single time.
For a bit.
How many you have?
Okay, yeah, we'll wait for him then.
So you have a right to worry. There's a lot coming at you. You don't need to read that.
Yeah, so we have 2 mics.
The choice is amazing,
Wait for him to.
but the information overload that comes with it
Y'all mic'd up.
is real and quite daunting.
Yeah.
Oh, you got 2 mics?
Yeah, we got.
Amazon's made over 5,000 announcements to date, and it's growing exponentially.
Yeah.
There'll be over 2,000 announcements this year alone. Namespaces is another way to look at the complexity of the landscape, the amount of information we need to consume to make the most use of Amazon services. Namespaces correlate with, but they're a smaller number than the number of services themselves. Those two are growing exponentially. Amazon publishes nearly 300 blogs per year that we all need to consume to stay current. And that's just what's coming out of Amazon. Ultimately, the amount of information content that we need to understand, manage, consume to be able to remain expert and make the most out of Amazon services is related to the total number of services that exist. So in my startup Cloud Pegboard, we capture everything there is to know about all the Amazon services, and we catalog that in a database. So currently, our count of catalog services is 256 discrete services and tools. And it's actually going to be a little bit more tonight by the time the end of the show is over. Back in 2015, I was Executive Director of Engineering at Novartis Research. And in the process, I moved our organization to the cloud, to Amazon, in a cloud-first strategy. Along the way, we onboarded and trained nearly 500 engineers and informaticians to our cloud platform. And while I was personally feeling the suffering of the pinch of this information flood, I realized I had a much bigger problem. It was multiplied times all these hundreds of practitioners. Each one needing to ingest and consume and spend precious time to keep up. At the same time, as we saw through a number of architecture reviews, sometimes the solutions that were being built were inferior to what they could have been, oftentimes due to suboptimal tool choices, and on occasion we even had to do some fairly significant refactorings. What's important, what's more about this, is that this is not a domain-specific problem. There's nothing biomedical about this. This affects every Amazon practitioner on the planet. It's all the same information flow. So seeing the need and opportunity for even greater impact, in January, I left Novartis, and I went back to becoming an entrepreneur and created Cloud Pegboard to solve this information overload problem and help every Amazon user be able to keep track and get the most out of all of the Amazon services and all the capabilities they have to offer. Okay, great. Now I got a new startup. I know a lot about the functionality that I think we need to know. I learned a lot about that in the last organization through all those experiences. But let's focus today a little bit on the non-functional requirements. I just asserted that we have a potential market segment of millions of users. Right? Werner Vogel's talked about that earlier today. So I need to be able to scale elastically to a fairly high scale, and we're a startup. We're very young, so I have no idea what the adoption rate is going to be. So I need to be able to handle that scale with elasticity. At the same time, we have a set of use cases and a whole market segment for the enterprise market, in particular where there's regulated workloads, such as healthcare, life sciences, financial services, where there's a need to manage and govern policy and other information within the organization across the dimension of AWS services. So here I am, a bootstrapped, self-funded startup. I need to deliver business value quickly, and I need to meet all these non-functional requirements. And I don't have additional resources to work on building purely non-functional requirements and then maintaining them. So what am I going to do? What might you think about how approaching that problem? So I need a lever. Not being deliberate about how we approach this easily could have ended up with building a bunch of EC2s or containers, managing OSs and OS configurations, having to maintenance burden of patching and having patch policies, and then demonstrating compliance to that for these enterprise customers when they come and audit, and all this other undifferentiated heavy lifting. But good tool choices can significantly and disproportionately impact outcome. So what choices can I make that will get me that amplification? So what we did is we took 3 strategic approaches. I like to approach things strategically, and the first choice was first to address the non-functional requirements at the outset and not allow them to become technical debt. That may seem obvious, but that happens very often in startups that gets deferred. Even Werner Vogels was talking about that earlier today, about security and other non-functional requirements being postponed and urging us to do it up front. That's what this is all about. The second was to stick religiously with infrastructure as code. And third, and most importantly, was to rely on serverless managed services. It's not how much you invest, it's the tools you choose. That's your lever. So we've talked about our non-functional requirements. Here's the beginnings of our architecture and how we're addressing some of those. This is a SaaS service, so it's pretty straightforward. We need to serve up some static assets and metastatic assets, as well as our dynamic information, and with an API to make that accessible to the UI. By simply choosing serverless, all these services you see here are serverless capabilities. Out of the box, without really doing anything, I get some security, scalability, elastic scalability, nearly no maintenance, and a lot of reliability and robustness. All of these services are naturally spanning AZs, and the global services are spanning AZs as well as regions. I'm not doing any of that. I'm making Amazon do all the work. I don't share very well. It's not how much you invest, it's the tools you choose. We mentioned we have these enterprise requirements that they need disaster recovery and security and availability. This is all one region as I've drawn this right now. But since I'm religiously sticking with infrastructure as code, by simply rerunning a CloudFormation template, we happen to use CloudFormation, I immediately now have dual regions. This could even go to more. It didn't cost me anything, literally minutes to get this. And so now I have a full DR story. In fact, I usually don't call it disaster recovery, it's disaster tolerant, because this is active-active, which means I don't have any maintenance. It's a lot of energy to build, deploy, and test DR plans and then show evidence of all that testing. This is just inherent and native into the architecture that will fail gracefully and fail back gracefully. Let's just dive into those tiers a little bit. There's 3 tiers here that I'll segment. So to serve up our static and metastatic assets, we're using S3 hosting. As we said, we get a lot of that out of the box. It's serverless, so we have all those benefits. But with a few lines of CloudFormation, I can now turn on S3 object versioning and protect against accidental deletions. Can also turn on cross-region replication. And instantly, I have another copy of everything I have in S3 available in a second region with no effort. This is really simple, but it really makes me excited. How easy is that? Every time you post an object onto S3 in one region, it just shows up in the other. I'm easily amused. So that's what we get out of that. Those 2 fundamental capabilities, I can now build on that to use origin failover, which is a relatively new feature out of CloudFront, which in the case of a failure in the primary S3 region, will automatically route over to my secondary region to serve up my assets. And there's no breaking glass and executing disaster recovery plans or anything else. I don't have extra maintenance or staff worrying about that. S3 will just do, or CloudFront will just do that natively for me. And when S3 comes back, well, maybe it was even an entire region failure, it'll just flow back. There's no effort on my part. On the persistence layer for the dynamic assets, it's a very similar story. We're using DynamoDB. You could easily have used RDS as similar architectural features to implement that here. We happen to use DynamoDB. But by enabling global table replication, I now have live copies in each region of my database. And since it's multi-master replication, I can write to either region, and so it allows me to have this be an active-active pattern. Because I have copies of all my S3 and all my DynamoDB assets in both regions, I can now have independence, and so when my APIs need to reach out, they're always reaching to their local region. There's no cross-region dependencies. So finally, on the API tier, instead of using edge-optimized API gateways, I use the regional API gateway, so we have control of exactly where the resources are. And then each has their own cluster of Lambda functions, giving us all that beautiful serverless capability in terms of scalability and low maintenance and low overhead. And then to bring that all together, Route 53, I set up some health checks for each region. And then using latency routing, Route 53 will automatically route to the lowest latency region, giving me a little bit of a performance boost. But in the case of a failure, it'll automatically fail over to the surviving region. And then again, there's no maintenance and no effort in that. When it recovers, whatever was going on, it'll automatically fail back. So hopefully you can see with a little bit of thoughtful architecture choices and using serverless and making use of all these, this is just a list of the service capabilities that I leveraged. All these capabilities are already there for the taking, and it's very easy to just turn them on. So this is more about choice and strategic thinking than it is about sweat. And by doing that, we're able to build a secure, reliable, fault-tolerant, low-maintenance, scalable infrastructure that'll help me serve my, hopefully, millions of AWS users that are going to get value out of this, as well as these enterprise customers in their high scrutiny. It's not how much you invest, it's the tools you choose and the features that you leverage. So I explained a little bit about our non-functional requirements as well as the architecture that we're using to address that. And that was just the front end of the architecture. Those same kinds of patterns exist for everything that we're doing. So this is the part of the interface to Cloud Pegboard, the product that we're making. Ultimately, there is a product at the end of all this architecture. There's a reason for this. So I just thought I'd show you a little bit to tie it together what we're doing with Cloud Pegboard. So Cloud Pegboard helps Amazon users stay on top of things and really get the exact right information at the right time without getting extra chaff and without spending a lot of time searching for information. And so we do this by collecting everything there is to know, we structure it in a database, and then we can present it back in a number of different interfaces. One of them is this table view of all the service data. We also have, there's another view which is a data sheet that shows you everything there's to know about a given service in one tab. There's email notifications of changes to services, Slack integration, API integration, and so on. So here I'll just show this table view. And I'm showing 6 services, and these are the 6 services that happen to be in the diagram. And a powerful feature of the service is that you can create lists of services. And it sounds very simple, but it's very empowering. Once you create these lists of services, could be the services in a project or in a tier, or maybe all your blockchain services, whatever it might be, you can group them. And once you group them, then you can easily find the information with a single click, and you get your view of the services you most care about in one view. But also, once you have this kind of list orientation, you can turn on email notifications, daily or weekly digests, so that any changes to those services, and just those that you care about and you subscribed to, you'll get notified of, whether it's one of these announcements or a blog, or maybe something you've been waiting on, VPC support or private link support, and you'll see immediately when that comes on, or any other feature change that we're cataloging. We manage nearly 100 attributes, and that's growing pretty quickly, of everything we're tracking. to further help you sort of manage the amount of information and really get just the right data that you need at the right time, there's a lot of columns that you could see here and all these attributes, but on the left, a little bit cut off, there's a menu where you can just pick what perspective you're using at any given time so that you can filter the columns to be just the ones that make sense. If you're selecting services, then you really don't need to know a certain piece of information, but you really might want to know what regions is a service available in. Does it support encryption at rest? I need to have it support CloudFormation. Is this service supported by CloudFormation? That's important while selecting, but not so much important while you're developing. So developing, you would get some different fields, or if you're doing a security or compliance audit, other information. And it's all very quickly available. I mentioned some of these enterprise use cases. Well, in the box there, you'll see that I've got a select group of columns. And the columns I picked here, I just created a custom view for what I thought would fit on this screen. So this is just an example custom view for the New York Summit. But in that column there, imagine I have the use case where I say my internal compliance policy is that you must be encrypted at rest and in transit. You have to be PCI, SOC, and HIPAA compliant. And by the way, also make sure that it is a service that by our own internal security policy or governance policy, it's a supported service or you're allowed to use it. And make sure you review the internal security guidance for how to configure and what's allowed for the ways that you configure and can use this service. All that information's in that one box, so you can very quickly see, yes, I'm compliant, and if it's not, there'll be a big gap which you can look at very quickly and then start to mitigate. Also, you might just take a look at the far right two columns. Those will show examples of enterprise data that's in our SaaS service. So we can extend the data model with enterprise data for proprietary columns that be attached to each service. And of course, for audit purposes and compliance or your regular documentation, you can export everything as a PDF or Excel, what have you. So as you see, hopefully by being thoughtful with the architecture and being strategic and picking some of these strategic principles, such as serverless and infrastructure as a service, you can build a secure, fault-tolerant, reliable, disaster recovery, disaster-tolerant capability without a lot of extra investment. In fact, almost no extra investment by just making the right tool choices up front. So it wasn't how much we invested, it was the tools we chose. So as a parting gift for hanging into listening to this talk, even in a room that doesn't have walls, I'm thrilled to let you know that we are going GA in August, so we're obviously very new. And if you register for the service before then, while we're in July, while we're still in our public preview, then the service is free for 2 years. So we're really encouraging early adopters to get on, use it, because we love feedback. We really want to learn from you. So give it a try, check it out, let us know how it's going. And thanks so much for your attention, and I think we have a few minutes for some questions. Thanks a lot. So, you can always reach me at that email if you have any questions or follow-up.
All right, if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand. I'll come over with the mic. Or you can follow up after presentation.
Okay.
Thanks, Ken.
Okay, thanks so much, everyone. Oh, get one.
So is a code, infrastructure as code you mentioned, is that compatible? Is that, can we extract that out of your API?
The infrastructure as code, when I say that, I really mean, in my case, CloudFormation, or could be Terraform. And one of the reasons why I emphasize, I use the word religiously, because I myself have been guilty, and I've managed many teams that have been guilty of doing a lot of it, or maybe none of it, or some of it. There's a difference between fully committing and 90% committing. So basically, write everything in CloudFormation or Terraform. You could even write it in Python if you want and use Bodo, or as Werner was talking about today, the CDK, the Cloud Development Kit. It almost doesn't matter what tool you use as long as you build it into the tool. As soon as you go to documenting what you did, or you did something in the console, you ran some commands on this AWS CLI, then you're starting to put this maintenance burden and a handoff trade. You know, I can just check something in and have someone else check it out and run it, and it will work. And I can come back and do something months later and I don't remember how it all works, or the documentation got stale. It's simple, but I really can't emphasize how valuable that is.